If you remember back to the last session that we had, which was at the end of an SLT Learning Leader meeting, we were looking at traffic lighting, where departments were, where you think that you were in terms of assessment procedures, and reflecting back on sort of that whole sort of aspect. Assessment obviously really critical for us, that we have that complete consistency across all staff in the team, and also that there's a consistent experience for all students who are sitting the assessments, no matter which particular class that they're in. If you remember also about the staff meeting last Tuesday, Stuart also talked about the fact that obviously assessment is vital in terms of us knowing what our students have actually learnt in our classrooms, how they're progressing. So it's it's linked completely, obviously, with our teaching and learning that sort of moves on from there. So for today, it's really about sharing practice that's going on across the school in terms of departments. And Richard, Mel and Rachel are kindly going to share different aspects of their assessment procedures. And this is not that we're saying we want you to adopt these as a particular approach, that this is the method we want everybody to do, but just to see some of the ideas and the way that people are personalising assessment to work effectively in their own area. And are there any ideas that maybe you can sort of think about, pull out of the sort of aspects that you think, oh, that sort of confirms that we're doing that sort of really well. So this is just some sort of, let's just say, some ideas of practice that's going on in different areas. There are going to be 3 8-minute presentations, and on the performer that I've given you, this one here, the table, okay, for you to think about, are there any key points of note, and also any questions you'd like to ask, because after each of the presentations, we're going to have a 5-minute question and answer session where we're going to, you get a chance to talk to each of the presenters about the aspects that they've shared. Okay, and then we'll finish up the session with a chance to meet with your Director of Learning and think about sort of what your sort of action points are. I've got short-term action points and long-term action points also on that performer. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Richard.
Thank you. Good afternoon. What we're looking at for my one is providing students with a consistent framework for assessment. We're having a few technical difficulties. Oh, there we go. It's working, but it's a bit slow, so please bear with me. But in terms of the process for assessment, this is just an overview that I won't dwell on, but you can see that we've mapped out for Year 7 and Year 8 where the actual assessments are going to be. And the idea of this is so that even though teaching might vary, depending on what your lessons are or who's teaching certain things slightly differently, which is allowed, obviously, as long as they're prepared for the actual assessment we've all agreed on, and it fits in with this framework so that the marking collation can happen at the right times. So the assessment process that I'm going to show you is that for each of the assessments that we do, you've got preparation time, which includes the content, the test itself, an element of reteach alongside the feedback. So the process should always follow that particular method. So this is what we do in preparation to an assessment. This one is all about, it's going to build up to an assessment about why Howard lost the Battle of Hastings. So within the preparation, you can actually look at the type of assessment that it is. But essentially, we follow this sort of method, if you like, because this is how to make somebody an independent learner, and I think this should underpin what assessments we actually do. So if you can get somebody to be an independent learner from a sense in any subject, this would work. You've actually got to go through a process where you set the context and build the field. That can involve going through the content. Model and deconstruct the work you're actually going to be looking at. Then you actually jointly work with them so that you can improve work or that you can make it better, or you can see more clearly how you should do it. And then ultimately they can independently structure their own work. So over the length of that scheme of work from 7 to 8, this is the type of skill I want them to develop. Equally, it will be then built on at GCSE as well. So it should all fit into that kind of process. So we plan quite a lot. This is a quads grid. So I won't go through what a quads grid is, but essentially it's a method of planning an answer. So the students should be, as part of that, they need to be able to plan an answer. So we teach them how to use this to plan an answer as part of the assessment process. They understand what the mark scheme is, and we spent quite a lot of time producing user-friendly mark schemes based on the new curriculum that the students can understand, essentially boiling down to a statement bank, if you like, what would get you into emerging, expected and excelling These are actually built on qualities that they're sort of assessed on. If you've got children, you might know of it. That's exactly what they do when you're at Key Stage 2. So we work with Key Stage 2 people to understand exactly how they do the 3 E's, and then we also have introduced that here to simplify it. So the students can get an expected level or an excelling level, or if they're in the emerging level, then for the next assessment they probably get more scaffolding and structuring. Here we've got an example of the sort of things we do before the test. We're looking at a different kind of question, could be some similar content, but we're actually getting the students to highlight in writing which elements of an answer actually correspond to which quality we're looking for. We can also structure it, so this can be given to or taken away from students at any point. You give them structuring initially if they need it, but the idea is eventually that's going to go so that they don't need it when they come to write. So students that are very weak or students that have got special needs will get more of this and for longer than other students who might be somewhere in between. And those who've never needed it, you know, who were able to write effectively when they start here, which is few number of course, they wouldn't necessarily use that more than once or perhaps twice. They will then mark work themselves as part of the work. They'll mark others' work, so you can have peer assessment as well as actual assessment by the teacher, or they reflect on their own work, and they reflect on in the qualities that will get them the scores that they're looking for in the actual mark scheme. So when it comes to the actual test, this is the question. So they were looking at why did William win the Battle of Hastings, and that's kind of how we taught the content. Why did Harold lose the Battle of Hastings, though, is the test. So it's the very first one they do, so although it's about causation, it's the first one of those they do here. So it does give them the opportunity to reframe what we taught them as content. They'll be given this as part of the actual test. They have a blank one, they've got to fill in their own plan, because we're trying to teach them to plan your answer as part of what's going to be useful to them when you get to GCSE. So it's part of the assessment at Key Stage 3. When it comes to marking it, this has got targets that they would have. I would mark their work and I would write on the targets, which they would then reflect on with the green pen, the green and purple pen idea. I might write a couple of comments in purple they can respond to, but these targets are how to improve their work based on what they are expected to do according to the mark scheme. And they write down what their targets are and they then try and improve their work based on that. We also then do work on structuring, so literacy is a very strong element within history or the humanities, and probably in every subject to some extent. So how do you actually do a PED paragraph? You might be surprised to see the L on the end, because we try and link one paragraph to another one, that's hence the L. But we teach the students how to actually do pedal paragraphing based on their actual work, what they did do, what they should have done, what they could do next. So, I mean, this is a GCSE unit, so it's just demonstrating that what do we do at GCSE is also similar to what we do at Key Stage 3. The idea that you're just building on something they're already aware of and familiar with. So, in the light of this model, this is what we've been doing. So here's a question. It's a more complicated question. We teach them how to do active revision throughout this, which I haven't really mentioned. It's a different presentation altogether. But there's lots of different methods. One of them would be how to do sort cards correctly for this particular assessment. Quads grid, because we find with the new curriculum's demands for content, it's the best method used to plan. Same sort of idea, you can still analyse but at a much higher level. It's GCSE, the requirements will be slightly different, but again the mark scheme simplified in the same way. But were you able to read these? You can see they're longer. They're actually more in depth and they relate to the sort of qualities required at GCSE. But it's what they're familiar with, so you're actually building all the time on what they've already done. This is the test itself. So building on a different question, you can model and look through a question like it, then you do a different question for the actual test. They have to do their own plan, based on the quad grid again, and ultimately they can reflect, and here we put targets on. If you got in this box, what did you need to do to get there? If you got in this box, what did you need to do to get there? And it's personalised in their own exercise book. So what they needed to do, they've got their own individual comments. We thought of new techniques to fit in with the new curriculum. Pick the perfect example, and this is illustrated by this one. This is all about how John Snow did a research into cholera, and it could have been mentioned in this particular answer to show that he proved something that wasn't accepted by everybody else, and should be an example in their answer. It has to be as specific as this. It must have person, place, time, and event. And if it doesn't, then it's not good enough for the new curriculum's demands. But they also then have to go on to impact on other things. But techniques, you can bring in any technique you want to enhance the quality of the work as you're going through the process. So afterwards, they can start to develop their ideas again. They can look at a model answer. You can give them one paragraph they will reflect on. They have to write the next one. And again, they look at the MART schemes and decide what elements could they improve it to show that they've made a step forward, or what should they try to do in the future. And again, it's got the purple pen comments at the end. So really, as far as I'm concerned, this would be something to reflect on. This idea is how to make somebody an independent learner, and the purpose of assessment is to make students independent learners, so when they, at the end of year 11, sit in an exam, they could do it themselves. So that's what, I think essentially, if you went away with anything, is how to adapt that idea to perhaps your own assessment.